Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And specifically, I'd like to focus in on a really brilliant box set release made by Criterion about a month or so back, which is right here. This is referred to as Pasolini 101, which is celebrating the cinematic legacy of the great filmmaker artist Pier Paolo Pasolini in the context of a majority of his films that again are presented here in a multi-disc Blu-ray set with all the great aspects of this box set release, and we'll talk a little bit about that subsequently. But today, if you don't mind, I'd like to focus on one film in particular that is included in this fabulous release, and I'm speaking about a work which is described as being from the year 1966, and it is directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. And the name of the work is, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the Italian language, I hope you can forgive me, but it is Uccellacci e Uccellini, or as it's known in English, The Hawks and the Sparrows. This is the extraordinary work in the context of the filmography of Pier Paolo Pasolini. This film, written and directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini and produced by Alfredo Bini, and with the cinematography credited to Tonino Delicoli and Mario Bernardo, and editor Nino Baragli, and music credited to Ennio Morricone, and starring Totò and Ninetto Davoli. So this is the work which is, and again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation. I hope you can forgive me. I'm doing my very best. But it's Uccellacci e Uccellini, or as it's known in English, The Hawks and the Sparrows. And wow, what a dynamite film this is. This is so zany and wild, and has a type of absurdist riff about it. It has an exuberance and a style that it feels very much like, on the one hand, maybe a type of sketch comedy, silent comedy routine that's gone haywire in a wonderfully vibrant and lively way. And I think that's thanks in large part due to the great comic timing and physical comedy prowess of, and the great screen chemistry, the on-screen chemistry between our two stars here, Totò and Davoli. So, and they form quite a pair, a father and son team in the context of the film, and that's what we're told. And it is a type of road movie or journey movie. If we were to try to describe the plot of this film, we see the two of them engaged in conversation, engaged in talking and walking down these paths while they are going from place to place, a type of journey person's perspective, and encountering certain aspects of the countryside and community and society. Also encountering a bird, a talking bird, crow. And this crow has a type of identity and almost a type of, say, a quality that's associated, among other things, by the film and intertitle cards with Togliatti, or the concept of Togliatti, or sort of communist or Marxist thought. And so there's a type of, it's described elsewhere as a type of pedantic nature to the crow. And herein lies, I think, one of the great mysteries and beauties of this film. It is a journey film about father and son and a talking crow walking across the Italian countryside circa 1960s. This is the impetus of The Hawks and the Sparrows. And by that, I think, definition alone, or by that description alone, I think we can see that this is setting the stage for some very absurdist types of perspectives on a cinematic level. And this indeed sets it up for, I think, as I mentioned, sort of sketch or scenario based short story type of humor, and sketches with Totò and Davoli engaged in maybe role playing in one form or another, and then with the crow acting as a type of narrator or a Greek chorus in a manner of speaking, commenting while also creating a sense of acerbic wit and maybe even critique of the types of societal norms that one can say are being represented or being presented as metaphor, or perhaps even mocked or chastised or even severely attacked via these depictions that are in the hands of Totò, Davoli, and Pasolini. So, and not to mention the fact that we have, as I say, the great broad strokes of the physical comedic timings of Totò, I think supported with a great sense of a type of a generational, a generational maybe exuberance in the presence of Davoli, and we have the sort of the cinematic magic on display with metaphors come to life via the crow and other things that we see along the way. So, and also a type of road film or journey film that also has a kind of wit and acerbic quality and critique quality to the target of, I think, a lot of its subject matter, namely various aspects of Italian sociopolitical culture in the 1960s. So this is, I think, maybe my very crude way of trying to explain the Hawks and the Sparrows. I think also, not being a student of Italian, modern Italian history or political history, especially the 1960s, it's hard for me to really explain it very well. I don't have a great sense of expertise, but based off of my very general limited capacity and limited knowledge, when I see this film, The Hawks and the Sparrows, I'm struck by a number of things. So first off, I'm struck by how much it feels like, or we're seeing a lot to do with very, what one might say, less than optimistic depictions of pockets of society or examples of society. So in all the sketches that we see, in all the parables or metaphors or stories within stories that we see enacted by Davoli and Totò, and the talking crow and the hawks and sparrows of the title, or things involving the landed ownership classes, the agrarian societies versus sort of industrial societies, older generations and younger generations, classical art versus modern day pop music and the like, etc. So these present themselves throughout the proceedings of the Hawks and the Sparrows. And so already one begins to see the sense of a divide or clash between two separate or seemingly opposing sides to a particular issue. So there doesn't seem to be any suggestion of a type of unity or the possibility of unity, or say an alliance between these two seemingly opposing sides. They always seem to be presented in a sense of a clash, or a sense of a divide or disunity or disruption. So if we see the landed classes represented in certain of the sketch scenarios, we see them being very much maybe abusive of their power, seemingly, at least towards people who are occupying the spaces or the property or the land, whether that be in the case of, say, a family that is being threatened to be kicked out, or maybe trespassers on farmland and the like. There seems to be this type of almost abusive authoritarianism that seems to be on display in terms of the disruptions vis-a-vis the landed classes. But also that is seen within the cinematic viewfinder of Pasolini to also have a two-way street about it, because sometimes there seems to be almost a parasitic nature to a lot of those scenarios that we see. For instance, the trespassers on the land, Toto Davoli, in a very comic way, or speaking about defecation. And so that seems to be very much a not so unreasonable basis for a type of struggle, or a type of dispute between landed classes, or the ownership class on the one hand, and the occupying class on the other. So therein lies a type of issue that is, arguably speaking, a kind of two-way street, excuse me. And that goes to the title, The Hawks and the Sparrows, which is given meaning and a breadth of interpretation within the metaphor as explained in the film. Hawks and sparrows, maybe in the context of two separate groups of society. So the powerful classes versus the weak classes. And while there might be hopes for some kind of unity or union via, say, the teachings of religion, whether that's successful or not is part of the comedy, but it's also part of the issue that's being explored in The Hawks and the Sparrows. And perhaps the answer to that is reached by Pasolini and company, is that maybe there is no possibility of such union. Maybe there's something inherently destructive about these two groups, societal groups, vis-a-vis each other. One will always seek to devour the other, or the other will always seek to be devoured by the other. So that type of devour or to be devoured type of non-symbiotic relationship seems to be at the heart of what Pasolini might be positing if we were to look at this film in the context of an Italian social-political commentary. And what fitting place then to bring up? What more fitting place to bring up than the reference to Togliatti, right? In terms of the death of Togliatti and Togliatti's position in terms of the Communist Party in Italy, and the death, a type of death knell, if you will, a type of another form of devouring from maybe a very the individualized perspective of a public figure, but also in the context of a political party. And if we see that applied in metaphorical terms in the film like The Hawks and the Sparrows, I think we can reach some kind of possibility of an interpretation of this film as a type of devouring of one class by another, and the impossibility of a type of unification between and among different strata across class lines, thus perhaps ruining the chances for any type of practical application of communist or Marxist thought or theory, as I say, in terms of an application practically in the context of an Italian socio-cultural existence. So that type of maybe bleak or highly critical perspective, I think, is at the heart of maybe the almost cruel acerbic wit that is underlying each of the comic sketches of this film. I mean, this film is about devouring, it's about eating, it's also about digesting and defecating. It's also about chaos that comes about that. It's also about sort of the unreliability of sort of a group class dynamic. I mean, you take a situation involving, the scene involving pushing a car, involving a group, but members of the group don't seem to be able to exert any type of individual influence, thus dissolving or destroying the actual group dynamic to begin with. And that can be taken writ large into maybe a broader, say, critique on the state of the potential practical applicability of Marxist and communist theory vis-a-vis currency of Italian society of the times. And so and if that's the theory that's being posited by Pasolini and company, this is thus leading to the possibility of looking at this and linking it on an artistic level to concepts of death and concepts of absurdity and destruction and chaos, again set against the backdrop of comic timing, references to Buster Keaton and Godard, and Italian comedy a la Totò, also the differences in generations, Totò and Davole, I think, being prime examples of this generational divide, as well as references to this generational divide elsewhere references to, say, aspects of art from a quote-unquote traditional classical perspective versus perspectives on art and music from a quote-unquote modern or pop art perspective. But that's not to say that it's all doom and gloom. I mean, there are laughs and spirited chuckles along the way, and perhaps even more than spirited, quite lively bursts of laughter. And there's a type of joyousness, there's a type of joy and type of exuberance, as I mentioned. And I think that's coming down to Totò and Davoli. I mentioned this idea of the possibility of interpreting this film as maybe the impossibility of bridging the divide. But perhaps the very existence of Totò and Davoli together in the same film as a type of father and son team, but also as a comic duo, in many ways, walking together, talking together, acting like their own, say, comic duo team extraordinaire, and having fun along the way. There is no crisis point between these two characters per se. There is no sense of a crumbling of the relationship per se. They are almost speaking to each other and to us, the audience, winking at the audience, letting us know that they're having fun as we are having fun as well. And so there is this sense, I don't know if optimism might be the right word, but there is also a sense of a type of say, a presentation of this critique of Italian socio-political cultural life, but doing it in a way that is also filled with a sense of vitality and charm and wit. And perhaps that alone might be the solace, or might be the way forward in terms of a possibility in the hands of Pasolini, at least in the Pasolini, the cinema artist, right? Because Pasolini, in terms of, he's not making, well, I mean, he is making a political statement, yes, but he's acting in the context of an artist, because he is a director directing in film and writing and directing a film. And so in the context of this, or the realm of his art that he's creating, maybe this is the solution that he seems to be presenting, even in a world that seems to be crumbling by its very own absurdist qualities. And maybe this crumbling nature provides no possibility for any type of cross-generational linkage or connection, or any connection that bridges any class or social strata divides, thus leading to, say, further degradation of society as the society, quote-unquote, erodes from an agrarian-centered one to a more urban and industrial one, end quote. Maybe if this is the bleak solution that is the ultimate interpretation of the Hawks and the Sparrows, then that is very wholly flying in the face of the very existence of Totò and Davoli's relationship, which is, again, filled with life. It is itself a type of own hermetically sealed solution to the idea of the impossibility of the cross-generational divide. On the contrary, there seems to be a cross-generational connection and unity expressed by their very existence and relationship together. So that might be a clue to where Pasolini might be headed here. It's not, one can say, wholly cynical. Maybe it is an acerbic, and maybe it is an attempt to try to present a bleak landscape, but it's doing so also in a way that's very vivacious and very witty and very clever, and also very welcoming. So is it a hopeful gesture? Again, your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but what I am saying is that there is room for the possibility, let's put it that way, even in a world where slowly but surely we're turning into things or entities or concepts that are devouring the other. There is still room in this world of devouring the other for people like Totò and Davoli, for relationships like that to continue to evolve and grow, even as they go from place to place, as they walk across the countryside with a talking crow in hand, or not, as the case may be. So that is, in a nutshell, how, or one way that I view the Hawks and the Sparrows. And I should say, I point out before we move on, is that this film is like, it leaves one gobsmacked, to be perfectly honest. When I first saw this film, The Hawks and the Sparrows, in school, many years ago, it left me totally bewildered. I had no idea how to comprehend this, because it was just, it came to me seemingly out of nowhere. I was not prepared for the zaniness of this. I mean, it was very much like a very chaotic sketch comedy routine. And again, I had no fundamentals in the world of Pasolini, so I was even more feeling out to sea, as a manner of speaking. But I remember the professor at the time explaining to us or providing some kind of guidance to us in the form of this number of statements during class. So one of which being, and I remember this so well, which is, if we can say anything about Pasolini after watching The Hawks and the Sparrows, it's that this is evidently the product of a person, an artist who is so intelligent. Just try to count all the ideas that are emerging within The Hawks and the Sparrows. You can't. It's endless. It's infinite. There's so many things happening at once. This is a highly intelligent and super creative and imaginative human being, an artist that we're dealing with here. So that is definitely a ton of points in the favor of the film. It's so great in that way. It's so, and in that, I mean, not just in terms of the political critiques, but also in the cinematic techniques. Go to the opening credits, the singing, the song that we hear, essentially singing out the credits, or the way in which the framing is engaged, quotations to Chaplin, or quotations to Godard even, or maybe even homages, or maybe critiques of those, perhaps, because Pasolini has a tendency of being very sort of this type of a polemic viewpoint, which also is very, I think, attractive in terms of the Pasolini art form. But he's really experimenting with form and style in a way that is very much has a type of a wonderfully chaotic jumpiness to it, which I think is really excellent. And he's playing with different strands of narrative, different places and times even, which I think is also very, very much something we haven't seen in the Pasolini body of work up to now, but perhaps this might be something that we will see going forward in terms of parallel narratives at play, and also techniques involving like speeding up the frame rate, or the playing around with music, silent film techniques, etc. One might say that there's a certain austerity in the works of Pasolini up to here, like Acatone and Mamma Roma, even Love Meetings and Gospel According to Matthew. And so in that way, a film like The Hawks and the Sparrows might be seen to be a huge break artistically from those films into, quote unquote, a different era of Pasolini works. But I would, if you feel that way, I would draw your attention very respectfully to a work like La Ricotta, which I think also itself had this type of off-the-cuff, almost experimental style. It was very much wonderfully jumpy. And so La Ricotta and The Hawks and the Sparrows, I think, have this spiritual kinship that I think is undeniable. And thus, it is very much the case that one can make that The Hawks and Sparrows is very much consistently a Pasolini film in the context, even within the early 1960s. And so it's an incredible feat. Also, we have a kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect and humor that also has a very caring and sincere sensibility about it. And I would say too that this is shown again with the focus on Totò, the focus and cinematic interest on Totò and Davoli. When the camera is focusing in on these two characters and actors, there are close-ups that are warm and fresh and inventive, and you really feel them and their presences, and you get a sense of who they are. They might sometimes be on opposing sides, etc. They might be on a sympathetic side, or maybe not so sympathetic light, etc., depending on the sketch that we're in at the time. But there's always a type of immediacy and a connectivity that one can have as a viewer. And I think that warmth also goes to another Pasolini cinematic trait, is that he always trains his camera in a way that is very caring and respectful of the subject, whether it's the close-ups on the faces and the focus on the sort of working classes from a sort of the Marxist perspective of Pasolini that we saw on display in works like Acatone, giving people of the class of Acatone and his class their due and their respect in the form of the cinema work Akatone, or the same thing can be said for someone like Mama Roma in that film, Mama Roma, or the people that are being interviewed in love meetings, or the faces of the individuals and people that Christ meets in the cinematic depiction, the Gospel according to Matthew. And I think that type of respect is definitely there, focusing on Toto and Davoli. But we're also very admittedly in a type of new chapter, arguably speaking, in the realm of Pasolini, one where he is very much focusing on the experimentation of form and style while still providing that acerbic wit and graceful, say, critique that can sometimes turn very vicious and perhaps bleak indeed. But it's maybe that use of style, cinematic style, the experimental and very lively use of cinematic style that serves to counterbalance the potential bleakness of the political or socio-political message or critique that he has. You know, again, the devouring of one class or another, versus the exuberance of the experimental nature of Hawks and Sparrows with Toto and Davoli at the center. So that counterbalance, I think, itself is very unique and very much a strong characteristic of Pasolini's work. The Hawks and the Sparrows being a great example of this. This is why The Hawks and the Sparrows, in my eyes, is one of the great, great works of Pasolini. It is, as I say, when I was young, I was totally knocked over by it. I did not know what to make of it. But as time has progressed, and I've watched it many, many times since, it has not only grown on me, but it has really, grown. It has become, in my eyes, one of my favorite Pasolini works, because of its huge mix and blends of styles and forms and ideas that sometimes clash with each other, but those clashes are very purposeful and relevant and very current indeed. What a brilliant Pasolini film this is. This is the film which is The Hawks and the Sparrows. The Criterion Collection has released this film, The Hawks and the Sparrows, Uccellacci e Uccellini, as part of this Pasolini 101 multi-disc Blu-ray set, which Criterion released earlier this year. And this is described as being from the year 1966, this film is, and it's at aspect ratio 1.85 to 1. And this Blu-ray is based upon, or it's being purported to be based upon, a 4K restoration. And I have notes on the 4K restoration on page 94 of this great booklet. And I quote again about The Hawks and the Sparrows. This 4K restoration was undertaken by the Cineteca di Bologna in association with Compass Film from the 35mm original camera and sound negatives provided by Studios Cine. So, this is a film that, again, I saw many, many years back, and then I was very fortunate to have been able to get a great copy of this, or a release of this, a physical media release of this, several years back as well. This was a non-Criterion release. You know, there have been some great Pasolini film releases over the years, such as the great team over at Eureka Masters of Cinema. So those releases have always been ones that I've relied upon, and they've been very, very reliable indeed. But I must say that I love this look. I love the way this looks and sounds on this Blu-ray disc here. I will say that, again, I do notice that grain, or I do notice that kind of speck, the way it sort of not really moves, I think that's not the right word, but it has that grainy look to it, which I think is meant to mimic the inherent nature of the black and white photography grain as it would look as projected on film, the various film prints that would be all over the world. So I think that has a sense of the fidelity to the nature of the black and white photography, which I have no problem with at all. I think it's fine. Once in a while, not so much Hawks and Sparrows, but maybe once in a while in other films, such as within the set or maybe elsewhere, not just Criterion, but also elsewhere, there might be this sense of that being saturated a bit too much, thus really making the digitized look of it really evident, which is a shame. I mentioned that, I think, in the context of Love Meetings, the film, I think, on the third disc here for the Pasolini 101 set. But for me, the Hawks and Sparrows presentation here doesn't go in that extreme direction. I think, on the contrary, it has it feels just right. Again, if I were to use my non-technical parlance, and I think that it has this. There's a sense of reliability here that makes me want to come to this particular release every time I rewatch this film, The Hawks and the Sparrows. So. I am, again, overall very much pleased with this, and also it's meant to be a type of quote unquote. I don't want. Again, I mean this very complimentarily. It's meant to have, I think, that type of messy look to it. I mean, it's meant to feel like a rough-edged film, in a manner of speaking. So I like how the presentation strikes a good balance between the rough-edged nature of that on the one hand, and also applying the technology in a way to quote-unquote clean up the image on the other. So I like the way that it seems to balance that, and has a sense of fidelity and faithfulness to the age nature of this. So I think that in that way, I find it to be a very pleasing viewing and listening experience indeed. And let us now speak about the supplements that can be found on this disc. This is, again, disc number 005, which has the film, The Hawks and the Sparrows, and then it has supplements that can be said to be linked to such film experience. And when I press the supplements submenu, it takes me to three supplements that are listed. So the first one is Toto at the Circus, and this is approximately 7 minutes. And if we press this, we can see a description here. This deleted scene from The Hawks and the Sparrows features the film's lead actor Toto and includes the dialogue that Pasolini had planned to record for the scene. What that means is that there is no dialogue that is recorded, but you have it's silent, though there's no sound, but you have the planned dialogue that is indicated in subtitles on the lower part of the screen, and then you can have the English translation of those subtitles as part of the watching of this. So it's a very interesting scene itself. Again, it's another quote unquote sketch in this series of sketches or scenarios that is the design of the Hawks and the Sparrows, this time in a type of circus setting. So I think it seems to have, again, played again to the many strengths of Toto as a performer, and also links to, again, applying those in a metaphorical sense in the sort of grand design of the Italian social, political, and cultural commentary that one can say is one of the base interpretations of the Hawks and the Sparrows. And you see stand-ins for various aspects of it. So at least that's the possibility anyway, as well as being a really fun and interesting physical comedy, not exercise, but the physical comedy example at its finest. So it's a very interesting deleted scene indeed. So that's the first supplement. And then we have Ninetto the Messenger. And this is a documentary. And it's in this documentary, which was directed by Jean-André Fieschi and aired on French television in 1997, actor Ninetto Davoli discusses his collaboration with Pasolini, whom he met in the early 1960s. This is approximately 29 minutes. And Davoli's relationship and Davoli's partnership, personal and professional partnership with Pasolini is a very, very famous, and the output of that, or one of the great results of that, is the collaboration, the cinema collaboration that we have between the two of them, the two artists, such as a film like The Hawks and the Sparrows. And so this documentary, which is essentially a long interview, kind of one-on-one with Davoli himself, again, circa 1997. And he's speaking about his meeting with Pasolini, working with Pasolini, and just really fascinating and intimate details about like their relationship. And there's at one point when he describes his relationship with Pasolini at that time as being so, it's like two people inhabiting the same body. It was that type of close-knit symbiotic relationship, such that it was like if there's a type of a physical change, maybe Gavoli was eating a lot and maybe he gained some weight, then Pasolini would be immediately aware of that. He would detect that. So this is a really interesting thing. So there was a real closeness, and they were very much mutually responsive to each other, that being an example, and also expressing about how Pasolini is very physically fit and so super intelligent, always almost to the point of sometimes mocking or sometimes making fun of other people, maybe in a joking way or maybe not in a way that was for him, from his point of view, kind of innocent as well. So as well as working with him on a type of artistic level, and also some details too, very personal details. Pasolini, Pasolini, and the way Pasolini died. This is a very infamous and very sad and very tragic set of circumstances regarding the death of Pier Paolo Pasolini. And Davoli here mentions in a very frank and moving way. He mentions what happened to him when he first heard the news and what he had to do during that day, and what happened. What happened. It was just very much nothing out of the ordinary the night before, the last time they saw each other. But then, when he heard what happened, the terrible thing that happened to us, it was a very obvious, understandably so, a huge shock. So he expresses that, or explains a little bit of that as well as other things. So and Davoli. So once again, I must say Davoli is so full of life here, and he's expressing it in very honest terms, very glowing terms, and very real terms. His perspective on his relationship with Pier Paolo Pasolini, and so you get that here. Very much so. So please check this out if you can. This is Ninetto the Messenger, and it's approximately 29 minutes from 1997. And then you get the trailer, which rounds out the supplements that we find here. So again, it would have been really great to get maybe some more supplements, maybe an academic discussion with a Pasolini expert or something on the significance of the Hawks and Sparrows, or maybe a commentary track. That would have been really great. But again, those sorts of criticisms aside, what we do get is really fascinating, and they accompany this brilliant film, one of my favorite Pasolini films, which is The Hawks and the Sparrows. So and also it'll give us a little bit of room to praise the essay by James Quandt, which we'll talk about momentarily. But in any event, that's the state of things with regards to the supplements. And as I mentioned before, let me say it again, that in a separate video we will be talking about the specifics regarding our impressions, or my impressions regarding this packaging and design, the artwork design. But let me just say that the Hawks and the Sparrows would go as this, or in the sleeve here, which is part of this hardbound storage mechanism, the sleeved-based storage mechanism for the discs, the Blu-ray discs in this box set, the Pasolini 101. And again, we'll speak more about how we feel about this in a separate video. But before we end this video, I must say that I must once again shower praise on the great James Quandt. We mentioned before that in addition to the comprehensive essay, which we will also talk about in a separate video, that's part of this book, there are separate critical essays, or analysis essays for each of the films. And that is true for the Hawks and the Sparrows. So this is starting on page 54. This is another great one. They're all great. James Quandt is really just exceptional way of writing. Very easy to follow and hitting all the points. Oh my goodness. Again, we said before about how, maybe the supplements might have left us wanting a bit more. Well, we get that when we read the James Quandt essay. And that's true for all the films. But the Hawks and the Sparrows is no exception to that, my friends. All the points here are just brilliant. References to Godard and Buster Keaton are made. The Italian social political context of the mid 1960s Italy and the agrarian society versus the urban rise of industrial economy. The status of walking films or journey films or road movies, the importance of the presence of Totò and Davoli, and even references to other films as well. Sometimes we had mentioned that maybe when he made a reference in Acatone essay to the ending of Mamma Roma, that might have been a bit much. But here he does make references that don't give the game away in terms of other films, which is really great. So there is such a reference made in this essay in Hawks and the Sparrows to a work like Salo, 120 Days of Sodom. So this is really a great essay. I love this. I really love this. And although I must say that maybe one can say that there is a little bit of a spoiler written with regard to the film Teorema. So if you are wary of spoilers, I would say maybe you might want to watch Teorema first before reading the Hawks and the Sparrows essay. I mean, it's not a huge spoiler, I would say, but it is kind of a spoiler for the film Teorema, but it's not a huge one. So, but just keep that in mind if you're still new to the world of Pasolini. But that being said, this is so wonderful and brilliant. So, the Hawks and the Sparrows critical essay. Again, watch the film first, and then you can read the brilliant essay by James Quandt. And perhaps ideally, it might be good to watch all of the films in the set first, and then you can take a look at these essays. But in any event, top marks. This is so great. James Quandt's work here is, there's not enough praise I can shower upon his great work. I mean, I wish I could do more, but because it is really A+++ work in my view. So well done indeed, and I just look forward to talking more about the other films in the set in the context of the Quandt essays, etc. So anyway, that is the gist of how I feel about the Hawks and the Sparrows as it's contained within this great set by the Criterion Collection called Pasolini 101. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now, and so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including the Hawks and the Sparrows, including the other films in this great set, Pasolini 101, and beyond. So, until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.